Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Betty Chen. Amid the pandemic's fallout, alongside aging populations and falling birth rates, the world faces a pronounced labor shortage. Numerous countries turn to foreign labor to address this workforce deficit. Our focus shifts to Asia today, a hub for a quarter of the world's migrant movements, as we explore the lengths to which Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea are going to attract international migrant workers. Joining us today are Tzu-chi, National Chengchi University International College of Innovation Assistant Professor, and Chien Yi-chun, National Chengchi University Department of Political Science Assistant Professor. A warm welcome to both of you on the show. Data from the International Labour Organization reveals that in 2019, the global workforce included 169 million migrant workers, representing 4.9% of the total. So given the current labour shortages, as well as the dwindling birth rates and a surge in the surge of the retirement among baby boomers, so what shifts can we anticipate in the global labour market going forward? So Professor Oh, please.
Yes, I think we can expect that the global competition will become more and more severe because historically there has been labor migration from emerging economies to the larger economies. So it has been the trend. But nowadays, as we can see, just like you have mentioned, the dwindling birth rates and also the retirement rate has been increasing. So there will be more and more need in labor. And also, I think recently we have also been talking about what will be the impact of AI on the future economies. So these are some of the uncertainties we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm. Professor Chien, how do you see the changing landscape in the global labor market?
Yeah, so, well, of course, we'll focus on East Asia later on in this interview, but I think I'll first mention, I think global migration is a ongoing phenomenon for decades. So it's not only in Asia, also in other parts of the world, we are seeing differences in economic development and also different demographic structures also drive international migration. So in the past, we are usually seeing people migrating from so-called developing countries to developed countries. So we've been witness this kind of trend for over the decades right now.
Also, our two professors, you have talked about AI and also you talked about maybe because of the impact of the pandemic. So now the labor market has changed as well. So migration within Asia occurs with significant frequency as highlighted by the accompanying chart, showcasing a unique pattern of internal circulation across the region. So what are the driver of this phenomenon, like internal circulation? Maybe we start with Professor Chien.
Yeah, so just give you some data as a background to know the context a little bit more. So demographics suggest that within 10 years of time, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan will have over a quarter of population will be over the age of 65, which means within 4 people you meet on the street, one of them will be what we call senior citizens or elderly people. That's the first thing. And at the same time, these 3 countries, East Asia countries, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, we are facing this problem of declining fertility rates, right? So I have a data in front of me right now in the UN statistics shows that in Japan, currently the fertility rate is 1.3, and Taiwan and South Korea, unfortunately, we're competing for the very bottom of the fertility rates. We're
Not
racing
in a good way.
for the bottom. So Taiwan currently at the 0.9, and South Korea at 0.8. So with the natural replacement rate at 2.1, we are seeing this declining population. This in total, we are anticipating East Asia labor migration or labor regimes or labor market will be losing about 15% of the working population in the next 10 years. So that is the reason that we are seeing this massive inflow of labor migration within Asia, because we are losing this working population in these 3 countries. That is why they really need to attract labor migrants to come to their country to provide a working labor force.
Thank you very much for your explanation. Then Professor Oh, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so if we see the data globally, labor migration has been very important. So according to the data, 1 in 30 is actually a migrant. So we can see globally it's already the trend. If we focus on Asia, actually we can see, according to the data, 40% of international migrants were actually originally from Asia. So as you can see, Asia being the booming economy, so there were actually different direction of migration are going on. Either, for example, Taiwan can be the destination of migration, but it can also be the origin of migration. So there were different drivers of migration in Asia right now. And especially you can see one of the very important migrant workers in Taiwan are the caregivers. So we have several caregivers from, for example, Indonesia, the Philippines, but we can also see in their hometown, they will also need other caregivers who take care of the children of these migrant workers. So from this perspective, you can see there were several directions of migration were going on right now in Asia especially.
So thank you both for sharing with us these important data. So my next question is, which type of labor is currently most lacking in, say, in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan? Can you observe any similarities, or like in different markets, there are different needs? Professor Chien.
So currently, I think in all the 3 countries that we are discussing right now, we are mostly lacking in the labor market are the what we call 3D jobs: difficult, dangerous, and dirty. Those are the jobs that local people would not willing to participate in. For example, we mentioned care work as a good example. Also, construction works, manufacturing works. Those are the major receiving industries for those labor migration.
Mm-hmm. So how are we going to fill this gap? Any suggestions regarding the 3D type of jobs?
So currently, how we are, all the 3 countries as a general trend, we are, all the countries are thinking about ways of designing labor policies or migration policies to attract labor migration. For example, Taiwan implemented this Employment Service Act in 1992 as the first policy to officially recruit migrant workers from Southeast Asia countries. And very similarly, in Japan and South Korea, they started with, in 1992, they have this technical intern training program we call TITP. Both countries had this program starting in the 1990s. What is interesting that Taiwan is different from them is that in Japan and South Korea, they are using this trainee program. They are not officially workers. They are trainees, meaning that they are coming to South Korea and Japan to learn the skills. So they are not considered workers. Whereas in Taiwan, we use very formal workers, guest worker scheme to recruit them. From 1992, they are the guest worker program to recruit migrant workers to work in the industries that have labor shortage.
So you talk about a TITP. T stands for trainee, right?
Yes.
So does it mean that once they receive the training, they go back to their home country, or can they stay?
So the expectation is that they are coming here for the training, right? Mm-hmm. So in South Korea, in Japan, the extent of their stay actually depending on the industries or the company that recruit them. And the expectation is that once you receive your training, you are supposed to return back to your country. You have no rights to stay. Okay. And at the same time, during their stay, they are not considered workers. So they are not covered under any labor standard protections. For example, work holidays, for example, any health protections, because they're considered trainees. They are sort of like students, and actually they are working as guest workers. So in terms of labor protections, Taiwan actually outcompete Japan and South Korea in the policies compared to the technical trainee program. Taiwan provide a more extensive protections for the Employment Service Act.
Because we do have a complete legislation to protect the rights of the foreign workers in Taiwan, right?
That's correct. And also at the same time, I do like to mention that because Professor mentioned migrant care workers earlier. Migrant care workers in Taiwan actually are excluded from the Labor Standard Act because of their industry. They're saying care works are not typical work. So they're excluded. So Taiwan has a good story and bad stories. We have protections, for example, for majority of the migrant workers, but at the same time, majority of the female migrants who are working in the care industries, they are excluded from the protections.
So thank you, Professor, for pointing this out. So now I'd like to switch to Professor Oh. So you mentioned about these caregivers in Taiwan, which play a very important role in supporting Taiwanese society. Given the situation that they are not protected by the law, what should we do to make the situation better?
Yeah, so I think in the long run, just like Professor Chien already mentioned, we need to put labor migration policy with the immigration policies together. So just in the past, we have been using this guest worker system, so which means migrant workers in Taiwan rely only on temporary visas, and they can also not apply for long-term residency in Taiwan. But after 30 years of this guest worker system, we start seeing several problems already. For example, one of the major issues for Taiwan is it's very hard to compete with Japan or Korea for those skilled workers. After maybe 10 years, or more than 10 years, these workers already in Taiwan, they learn some languages. They also know the habits and also the culture customs in Taiwan, and they really want to stay. But the current situation is the system doesn't really allow many of them to stay. So when they already enter the age like middle age, they have many skills, but they cannot stay in Taiwan. So some of them probably will apply to work in Japan, in Korea. Recently, I also heard very skilled workers, they go to East European countries. So I think there will be a huge loss for Taiwan, because these workers, if they can stay, if they can have long-term residency, they can contribute to the labor forces in Taiwan more.
We understand that because of the data shared by our two professors previously, we understand that Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, we're really eager to get more workforce to stay, not just to come as a trainee. But talking about the legal side or the policy side, we talk about some strengths and weaknesses. Could you please tell us a bit more, like what will be something that can really help us in terms of the legislation or the policy, or what will be the major weaknesses that should be addressed?
So currently, in terms of legislation and policies, currently, Taiwan, after the implementation of the Employment Service Act since 1992, for a lot of workers, especially migrant care workers, there has been very limited improvement in terms of labor protections and legal protections. And the reason behind this lack of improvement was because, first, migrants do not have votes, right? So that is why, politicians and government, they are not responsible and accountable for any of their voices, right? So they are not they don't have a representative in our legislature. And secondly, because I had made an argument in one of my publications that because the political affiliations and coalitions between our political parties are very interesting, for migrant workers who are also considered marginalized, disadvantaged in our society, very few political parties pay attention to their circumstances. Because one of the major reasons that, for example, taking migrant care workers, for example, the care workers are providing care services for their patients or their clients. They are usually our elderly or senior citizens in our societies. And they have competing interests. Migrant workers, they want to have their weekly day off. They want to increase their salaries, but at the same time, they will play into the so-called employers, the care recipients, the elderly or disabled Taiwanese citizens. So in this kind of conflicts, a lot of times, Taiwanese political parties take the part with the care recipients, who are the senior citizens and disabled citizens in our societies. So that is why a lot of NGOs are pushing for the improvement for labor protections or legal protections of migrant workers. Has been no improvement so far. That is because, again, migrants do not have votes, and senior citizens, disabled citizens in Taiwan, they have stronger connections with political parties in Taiwan. That is why they can kind of stop any possibility of legal improvement for migrant workers.
Professor Oh, any other things that you would like to add?
Yes, I mean, I totally agree that in terms of policies, we need to hear more voices from the migrant workers. And in addition to that, I would say I would like to maybe mention some other structural issues. So, for example, if in the long run, if we want to keep or want to invite these migrant workers stays, then probably we also need to provide more trainings in languages and also cultures, and also provide more opportunities for the integration between migrant workers and also local residents. So on the other hand, Taiwanese society can also learn more from these migrant workers. So nowadays, maybe like from Taipei main station and also other main station, we can already see some migrant places around in Taiwan. But if you look more carefully, usually these local residents and migrant workers are usually more separated. They didn't really have much chance to know each other. So I think if we, in the long run, policy would be one perspective, but the other perspective will be the Taiwanese society, how ordinary Taiwanese see these migrant workers. If ordinary Taiwanese could see these migrant workers as future local residents in some ways, then maybe we can also learn, for example, their own cultures and also their languages, and to be more open-minded with their stay in Taiwan. So usually there's a very famous saying in migration studies that we wanted workers, but human beings can. So this also reflects in our past policies. We usually just want temporarily cheap labor to stay, but we don't really think about what would be brought by these workers, for example, their children and also their long-term residency in Taiwan. So I think these are some other perspectives we need to consider in addition to the policies.
Definitely, we will talk more about that aspect later. So, studies show that the monthly salaries of migrant workers in Taiwan fall below those in Japan and South Korea, with wages in Taiwan amounting to just half of what is earned by their counterparts in Japan. So how can we increase the payment for migrant workers here in Taiwan? Any suggestions?
So I think the chart shows that Taiwan has the lowest salary for migrant workers, but then I think it's important to provide broader context. Local work, they actually are entitled to equal work pay or work salaries as local workers. So compared South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, Taiwanese workers actually receive the lowest in the three countries. That is why we see these discrepancies in their wages in the labor migration. That's because it reflects a bigger picture of the labor market in those three countries. And I don't think there's any way we can increase, because if you only increase migrant workers' salaries, what about the local workers, right? It's really hard to kind of...
what we need is an overall increase for the salaries for all, right?
That's my point
there.
Thank you very much.
So turning our attention now to Taiwan's migrant worker population, which has soared to 750,000. As mentioned before, Indonesians make up the largest group at 35.4%, closely followed by Vietnamese at 34.9%, with Filipinos and Thais also contributing significantly. The government is also planning to sign a memorandum of understanding with India. So, talking about social integration, what will be the daily obstacles faced by these migrant workers, and how can they be better integrated into our society, Professor Oh?
Yeah, as I said, I think the major barriers in daily life would be languages and also culture. And as we can imagine, like caregivers in Taiwan, they mostly live with their employer's family. So they only have some day offs, and during the day offs, they can meet with their family members or some friends. But largely, they were still very segregated from local society, I would say. So if in the long run, if we want to invite these migrant workers to become residents, then probably we need to learn from Japan or Korea to provide more language trainings before they come to Taiwan, or even after they arrive in Taiwan. We should constantly provide some language trainings and probably some free language learning opportunities, so they can learn Mandarin and they have more motivation to stay. So this is probably one way we can do.
I hate to say this, but I do think that there is still some kind of discrimination against migrant workers. So how can we try to eliminate this kind of discrimination against migrant workers? Any suggestions?
So This is a very big question, a very challenging questions for us. I think we are working in universities. I think our endeavor is to change the concepts of our next generation, right? So we teach our students. We hope to eliminate the biases or prejudice or discrimination against migrants or migrant workers in general in our classrooms. And also in this kind of conversation, we hope our audience, after learning more about their circumstances, will have more compassionate eye when they look at the migrant workers in our life that we encounter in our daily basis. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe the governments can also try to communicate more with the younger generation. For example, in the recent debates about whether we should import labor from India, there were actually some protests in Taiwan, and especially from the younger generation. They still have maybe not necessarily discrimination, but they have fear, and they fear that they will lose their jobs
because they don't understand.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So maybe before the governments adopt any new policies, they can try to communicate more with different stakeholders so they could understand the reasons behind the new labor policies.
Indeed, so public communication is always very important. So we talk about the total number of migrant workers, 750,000, that's a huge number. However, we also see that 85,000 of migrant workers are actually missing in Taiwan. So could you tell us a bit more about the missing, or you can say undocumented migrant workers in Taiwan?
Yeah.
Professor Oh.
So there were, as we can see, there were increasing numbers of undocumented migrants in Taiwan. And of course, the issue is very complicated. But if we try to simplify, we can identify a few factors. So one of them is the broker systems. So many migrant workers actually paid a lot of broker fees before they came to Taiwan. So when they arrive in Taiwan, they're already on huge debt. So this debt may be one of the reasons force them to become undocumented if they face some labor conditions that were not ideal to them. So some of them may choose to become undocumented. And the other structural issue is right now in Taiwan, it's still very hard for migrant workers to change their employers. So the labor organization like TIWA, for example, they has been advocating the freedom to change employers. So in Taiwan, if the migrant workers, they cannot change employers or negotiate what kind of the labor conditions were more ideal to them, then this will become one of the push for them to leave their current employment. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, what about a situation in South Korea or in Japan? If the foreign labor is mistreated or even abused, will there be a complaint filing system for them to file a complaint so that they can better protect themselves?
Yes, they do have the system, a legal system. Also, their NGO has been very, very active in helping those workers being mistreated or in their working environment. But I do like to mention what the major differences in Taiwan and the other two, Japan and South Korea, is that in the Japan and South Korea, the policy allow them to have more labor mobility in the labor market. So a lot of them can actually change their employer, although in the case of South Korea, they only change twice, but then they can change the employer. Some of them can even change the industries, the job category. For example, if you're not happy working in the restaurants, you can change to become a nanny, right? So then they have more labor mobility, so they don't have any incentive. They have little or less incentive to kind of go underground to work undocumented in the great labor market. Whereas in Taiwan, we are more strict in terms of our labor migrant worker policies, because they cannot change the employer, and they cannot change their job categories. So when you face, unpleasant working or environments, you don't have much options. And plus, you have large debt because you have paying so much into the brokerage. So there's very limited option, and the only option that is more, convincing is actually you have to run away or become undocumented. So among the three countries, Taiwan has the highest undocumented rate in this East Asia, in all the three East Asia countries. I think that's major reason for that is the policy in and of itself. And plus, our NGO has been very active helping them, but then they have their own financial and their own circumstances they have to face. Whereas in South Korea, there are numerous churches and NGOs. They're sometimes sponsored by the government to provide help for migrant workers, but we don't see that much in Taiwan. Yeah.
So talking about undocumented personnel, not just the employees themselves. Sometimes when they go missing, or maybe they have like some of them are pregnant, so they have these undocumented children. Is that a big problem in Taiwan, Professor Oh?
Yes, but I would like to clarify first. Not all of the migrant mothers and children were illegal in Taiwan. Nowadays, we can see. Increasing number of legal migrants, mothers and children as well. But if we focus more on the migrant mother and children issue, in general, we can see actually there were some changes in Taiwan. So for example, the Control Yuan, now they actually propose some corrective measurement to remind the importance of guarantee the gender equality in employment. So which means female migrant workers are also allowed to be pregnant and also giving birth. But the problem right now, or the issue, is there's a gap between these ideal policies and also the reality. So although most female migrants were allowed, according to the act, the Gender Equality Act, they were allowed to being pregnant and also giving birth in Taiwan, but not all of the employers are welcome this situation. So in most of the cases, they would be forced by their brokers to go back to their hometown to give birth instead of staying in Taiwan, giving birth, and later return to their employment. So there were actually some, I would say, some gaps in these ideals and also the reality. So if a migrant workers call like 1955, this is a hotline for migrant workers, some of the hotline would actually tell them, okay, no worries, you are allowed to give birth in Taiwan, but the reality is the migrant workers still need to figure out what they can do in reality. For example, how to negotiate with their brokers, with their employers, and also what they can do after the children were really born, who are taking care of these children. As we know, child care in Taiwan, even for ordinary Taiwanese, is a big issue. Yeah.
So definitely, we hope that people can pay closer attention to this important issue of migrant workers in Taiwan and also in Asia and the world. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.